This hotel is far too exclusive for someone like you. My brother sneered, throwing a crumpled $100 bill onto the pristine marble floor. Take this, go buy some fast food and leave before you embarrass our parents. He smirked, adjusting his custom silk tie, completely unaware that the heavy footsteps approaching from behind belonged to the head of security who was about to address me as the owner of the very building we stood in. My name is Zuri. I am 32 years old, and I spent my entire life being treated as the disposable black sheep of my family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who grossly underestimated your worth. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Atlanta meant a life of privilege to outsiders, but inside our sprawling brick estate, emotional coldness permeated every single corner. Our family was deeply entrenched in the local black bourgeoisie. My parents, Reginald and Vivian, valued absolute perfection, social status, and appearances above all else. They were the kind of people who measured a person by their country club memberships, their designer labels, and their professional titles. For 25 years, I was the daughter they hid in the shadows. While my older brother Darius was groomed to be the golden child, I was the quiet, observant girl who preferred reading financial reports and studying real estate markets over attending debutante balls or rushing the right sorority. My parents never understood me, and frankly, they never tried. They viewed my lack of interest in their superficial social climbing as a direct insult to their legacy. 7 years ago, they finally pushed me out, completely disowning me over a fabricated financial scandal that Darius had orchestrated to cover his own tracks. I left with nothing but a suitcase and a shattered heart. But tonight, I was returning. Not as the broke runaway failure they assumed I was, but as a ruthless private equity CEO who had just finalized a quiet multi-million-dollar acquisition of the exact luxury hotel where they were currently celebrating. I pulled my car up to the grand entrance of the Grand Monarch Hotel. The air smelled of fresh lilies and expensive amber polish. Towering crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the imported Italian marble floors. Tonight was my parents' 40th wedding anniversary, their highly anticipated ruby anniversary. I knew the entire VIP banquet hall had been booked for a lavish celebration filled with Atlanta elite local politicians and wealthy socialites. I stepped out of my vehicle wearing a bespoke, understated black silk gown that carried no visible logos but possessed a cut and fabric that commanded absolute respect. I took a deep, steadying breath, preparing myself for the inevitable storm. I had barely taken 10 steps past the grand revolving doors into the lobby when a sharp, condescending voice cut through the soft jazz playing in the background. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." I froze, my grip tightening on my clutch. Stepping directly into my path, effectively blocking my route to the private elevators, was my older brother Darius and his wife Chantel. Darius was 35, the undisputed pride and joy of my parents. He was wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit, his wrist flashing a heavy gold watch that I knew for a fact was bought on credit. Beside him, Chantel stood in a skin-tight designer gown, a glaringly obvious luxury handbag slung over her arm like a weapon of mass superiority. Chantel had always hated me. As a former beauty queen and a fiercely proud sorority girl, she thrived on hierarchy, and she firmly believed I belonged at the very bottom of it. She looked me up and down, her lips curling into a cruel, dismissive sneer. She scoffed loudly, ensuring that the nearby bellhops and wealthy guests passing by could hear her. "Zuri, I genuinely cannot believe you actually showed up here tonight," Chantel said, her voice dripping with venom. "And wearing what exactly?" "An off-the-rack dress from some discount department store. You are tracking cheap dirt all over this imported carpet. You do know this is a 5-star establishment, right? They do not just let anybody loiter in the lobby." I kept my face completely neutral. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. "Excuse me, Chantel," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and calm. "I am here to see Mom and Dad for their anniversary dinner. Please step aside." Darius let out a harsh, barking laugh and physically stepped closer, using his larger frame to intimidate me. "See Mom and Dad?" he mocked, crossing his arms over his chest. Are you completely out of your mind? You vanished 7 years ago after you failed to scam us out of our money. You brought nothing but shame to this family name. And now you think you can just waltz back into our lives on the biggest, most important night of the year. What is the matter, Zuri? Did you finally run out of couches to surf on? Did your little community college finance dreams fall through? I stared right into his eyes. His arrogance was suffocating, masked by the heavy scent of expensive cologne. He leaned in closer, dropping his voice into a menacing whisper. Listen to me very carefully, little sister. Tonight is about celebrating our family legacy. It is also about celebrating a massive $5 million wealth management deal I just closed this morning. My top-tier clients are sitting in that ballroom right now. Atlanta's finest investors and socialites are in that ballroom right now. I paid $30,000 out of my own pocket to host this event. I will absolutely not let my broke failure of a sister ruin my pristine reputation by showing up looking like a charity case. With a dramatic sigh of exaggerated pity, Darius reached into his tailored pants pocket and pulled out a crisp green $100 bill. He held it up between his fingers, making sure Chantel and the onlookers could see his supposed generosity. But he did not hand it to me. Instead, he opened his fingers and let the bill flutter lazily through the air until it landed on the cold marble floor, resting right at the tip of my designer heels. Take the money, Zuri, Chantel added, crossing her arms and smiling a terrible, triumphant smile. Go find a nice fast food drive-thru. Get yourself a combo meal and maybe a cheap motel room for the night. Just leave before your parents have to suffer the extreme embarrassment of looking at your face. Do not make Darius call security to have you escorted out like a common vagrant. I looked down at the crumpled bill resting on the polished stone. Years of intense trauma. Years of being told I was utterly useless, less than, and unworthy of basic respect tried to claw their way up my throat. In the past, the old Zuri would have broken down, the 25-year-old version of me would have cried hot, humiliating tears. She would have picked up that bill feeling the crushing weight of their rejection and ran out into the dark streets to hide. But the woman standing in the lobby tonight was not that frightened girl anymore. I had spent the last 7 years building an empire from the ground up, learning the brutal realities of corporate takeovers, and mastering the art of the silent victory. I did not move a single muscle. I did not break eye contact with my brother. His smug, arrogant smile began to falter just a fraction of an inch as my absolute silence stretched on. He expected me to cower. He expected me to flee. Are you deaf? Darius snapped his patience, wearing thin, as he noticed my calm demeanor. I said, pick it up and get out of here before I have you thrown out. He opened his mouth to hurl another degrading insult, his hand raising to flag down a nearby staff member. But he never got the chance to finish his sentence. Before I could say a single word in my defense, the distinct heavy sound of combat boots marching in perfect disciplined unison echoed across the vast marble lobby. The footsteps were moving fast, purposeful, and heading straight for our little circle. Darius smiled, looking past my shoulder, clearly assuming the hotel staff had finally recognized his profound importance and were coming to remove the trash from his presence. He had no idea what was about to happen next. The imposing figure leading the security detail was a man named Andre. He was a former military police officer standing 6 feet 4 inches tall with shoulders wide enough to block out the opulent lobby lighting. He moved with a quiet, lethal grace that immediately commanded the attention of everyone in the vicinity. Flanked by 4 of his best men, all dressed in immaculate dark suits with discreet earpieces, Andre looked less like hotel security and more like a private tactical unit. Darius immediately puffed out his chest, his face breaking into a wide, self-satisfied grin. He practically vibrated with excitement at the prospect of watching me get humiliated in public. He raised his hand higher, snapping his fingers in the air to ensure the approaching men noticed him. Over here, Officer Darius called out loudly, his voice carrying across the lobby to ensure maximum visibility. Thank goodness you arrived when you did. This woman is harassing my wife and me. She is a trespasser completely uninvited, and she is making the paying guests incredibly uncomfortable. I need you to escort her off the premises immediately. Use force if you have to. Chantel straightened her posture, smoothing down her designer dress and tilting her chin up to look down her nose at me. She let out a dramatic, exaggerated sigh of relief. Honestly, the riffraff they let wander through the doors these days is just shocking, she muttered loud enough for the gathering crowd of onlookers to hear. Please make sure she is banned from returning. We are hosting a very important VIP event tonight and cannot have this kind of trash ruining the aesthetic. Darius crossed his arms, staring at me with a triumphant gleam in his eye. This was his favorite game. Ever since we were children, he had always weaponized authority figures against me. Whether it was lying to our parents to get me grounded or manipulating school principals to get me suspended, Darius thrived on using other people to inflict his punishments. He stood there fully expecting Andre to grab my arm and drag me out the front doors while he and Chantel laughed. Andre and his team came to an abrupt halt directly in front of us. The air in the lobby seemed to freeze. Darius opened his mouth to give another arrogant command, but the words died in his throat. Andre did not even look at my brother. He did not glance at Chantel. He did not acknowledge their expensive clothes or their demanding tones. Instead, he stepped right over the crumpled $100 bill resting on the marble floor, his heavy boot leaving a faint scuff mark on the crisp green paper. He stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me, planted his feet firmly, and bowed his head in a gesture of profound, unwavering respect. "Good evening, Ma," Andre said, his deep, resonant voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "The private owner elevator has been prepped and is holding for you. Your penthouse suite has been secured, and the executive chef is awaiting your approval on the banquet menu." He paused, slowly turning his head to lock his cold, hardened gaze onto Darius. The intimidating security chief then looked back at me, his hand resting casually near his waist. "Are these individuals harassing you, Ma-am? Give the word and I will have them permanently removed from the property and blacklisted from all affiliated locations nationwide." The silence that followed was absolute. It was a thick, suffocating silence that seemed to suck the oxygen right out of the room. I watched the blood drain from Darius' face so fast I thought he might actually pass out. His jaw dropped, his eyes darting frantically between me, Andre, and the 4 security guards who had instinctively formed a protective semicircle around me. The smug, victorious grin was completely wiped from his features, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. Chantel physically stumbled backward, her designer heel catching on the carpet. She let out a pathetic, high-pitched gasp, clutching her luxury handbag against her chest, as if it could somehow protect her from the reality of what was happening. Her meticulously applied makeup could not hide the pale, sickly color her skin had just turned. "Excuse me," Darius finally managed to stammer, his voice cracking horribly. His arrogant demeanor was crumbling to dust right before my eyes. Wait. There has to be some kind of massive mistake here. You work for this hotel. I am Darius. I am a wealth manager. I spent $30,000 to book the main banquet hall tonight. You are supposed to throw her out. She is a nobody. She does not even have a reservation." Andre slowly turned his massive frame to face my brother. The look of pure disgust on the security chief's face was beautiful to witness. "I do not care if you spent $1 million, sir," Andre growled, taking one single menacing step toward Darius. "You do not speak to her in that tone, and you certainly do not issue orders to my staff. Now, I will ask you one last time to step away from her before I consider you a physical threat." Darius threw his hands up in defense, taking 3 rapid steps backward, nearly knocking Chantel over in his haste to retreat. He was shaking. The man who had just thrown money at my feet was now trembling under the icy glare of my employee. I let the silence stretch for a few more seconds, savoring the absolute destruction of their egos. I looked at the $100 bill still lying on the floor, then looked up into my brother's terrified eyes. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. True power never has to shout. "Stand down, Andre," I said softly, my voice perfectly calm and measured. The security chief immediately stepped back, returning his attention to me with a sharp nod. Let them stay. They are here for my parents' anniversary dinner. I would hate to ruin such a special occasion before they even have the chance to cut the cake. Besides, I want them to proceed to the banquet hall. I plan on observing the festivities personally. Let them enjoy the illusion of their importance for just a little while longer. Understood completely, Andre replied, gesturing toward the back of the lobby. Right this way. I adjusted my clutch and began to walk. As I brushed past my brother and my sister-in-law, I did not spare them another glance. I did not need to. Their shattered reality was radiating off them in waves. I walked smoothly toward the back of the grand lobby, bypassing the standard guest elevators where a line of wealthy patrons was waiting. Instead, I approached a set of heavy unmarked brass doors set into a secluded alcove. Andre swiped a black keycard, and the doors glided open instantly, revealing an interior of polished mahogany and mirrored glass. Before the doors could close, I heard the frantic hyperventilating whispers echoing from the lobby behind me. Darius had grabbed Chantel's arm, his voice a panicked hiss. Did you see that? Darius hissed, his breathing shallow and erratic. Did you see the way they treated her? How is this possible? Who is she sleeping with to get that kind of VIP treatment? There is no way she can afford anything in this building. Is she a high-end escort? Did she trap some billionaire sugar daddy? I need to know what is going on right now. I do not know. Darius, Chantel cried back, sounding like she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. But she just bypassed the entire security protocol. What if she ruins the dinner? What if she embarrasses us in front of your clients? I stepped fully into the elevator, turning around just in time to see through the narrowing gap of the doors. Darius was running his trembling hands through his perfectly styled hair, his mind desperately trying to rationalize the impossible. He was a man who worshipped money and status, and his brain was short-circuiting at the sight of the sister he had discarded wielding absolute, unquestionable authority over the very establishment he was using to flaunt his fake wealth. The heavy brass doors slid shut with a soft, satisfying click, cutting off their panicked voices entirely. I was alone in the quiet luxury of the private elevator as it shot smoothly upward toward the executive penthouse. I let out a slow, steady exhale, feeling a cold, clinical smile spread across my face. Darius thought the worst thing that could happen tonight was me showing up in a cheap dress. He had absolutely no idea that the real nightmare had not even begun. The trap was set, the guests were seated, and the lion was finally walking into the den. The elevator chimed a soft, melodious note as the doors glided open to the executive penthouse. I did not linger. I simply dropped off my clutch, verified the security feeds on the master tablet, and took the private stairs down one level, directly into the VIP banquet hall. Taking the stairs allowed me to bypass the main entrance, entirely slipping into the massive room like a phantom. The banquet hall was a breathtaking display of excessive wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. Tables were draped in imported silk linens and adorned with towering centerpieces of deep red roses, a nod to the Ruby anniversary. Soft ambient lighting reflected off the crystal glassware, while a live jazz quartet played smoothly in the corner. The room was packed with the upper echelon of the city. I recognized city council members, real estate moguls, and prominent socialites laughing and clinking champagne flutes. This was the exact type of crowd my parents lived to impress. I stood near the edge of the room, blending into the shadows of a massive floral arrangement, observing the people who had erased me from their lives. At the center of it all stood my mother, Vivian. She was draped in a shimmering ruby-red gown, a diamond necklace resting heavily on her collarbone. She was laughing brightly at a joke told by a local politician, her smile perfectly practiced and entirely devoid of genuine warmth. Beside her stood my father, Reginald, looking distinguished in a custom tuxedo, nodding along with an air of absolute authority. It took less than 2 minutes for my mother to spot me. I watched the exact moment her eyes locked onto mine. The polite, radiant smile vanished from her face so fast, it was almost comical, replaced instantly by a look of sheer unfiltered rage. Her jaw tightened, and the elegant champagne flute in her hand trembled. She excused herself from the politician with a stiff nod and began marching toward me. She moved with a frightening speed, her heels clicking aggressively against the polished hardwood floor. Before I could even offer a greeting, Vivian grabbed my upper arm. Her manicured nails dug painfully into my skin through the silk of my dress. She did not say a word. She simply clamped her grip tighter and yanked me forcefully away from the crowd, dragging me behind a heavy velvet drape near the service doors, where no one could see us. "What in the world are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper that barely concealed her fury. Her eyes darted frantically toward the main room, terrified that someone might have noticed her interacting with me. "Who let you inside? I specifically told the event coordinators to blackball your name at the front desk. I am here to celebrate your anniversary." "Mother," I replied evenly, easily prying her fingers off my arm. I smoothed the fabric of my sleeve. "It has been 7 years. I thought it was time for a family reunion." "A family reunion?" Vivian spat, her face twisting in disgust. "You lost the right to call yourself family the day you decided to drag our name through the mud. You have always been the dark cloud hanging over this family, Zuri. While Darius was out securing his future, you were bringing shame to our doorstep. And now you show up tonight uninvited, trying to ruin the most important night of our lives." She leaned in close, the scent of her expensive perfume suffocating me. "Do you have any idea what it took to put this event together?" she demanded, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. "Your brother paid $30,000 out of his own pocket to rent this venue." $30,000, Zuri? That is the kind of son he is. He is a successful, wealthy, respectable man who takes care of his parents. You could not even manage to keep a basic college fund from going bankrupt. You are a complete failure. You are nothing but an embarrassment. I will not let you ruin Darius' grand gesture with your pathetic presence." Just then, the velvet curtain was pushed aside, and my father stepped into our secluded corner. Reginald took one look at me, and his expression hardened into a mask of pure ice. He did not look surprised to see me, only deeply inconvenienced, like he had just discovered a rat in his immaculate kitchen. "Vivian, why is she still standing here?" my father asked coldly, not even addressing me directly. "I told you to have security handle this. We have the mayor deputy sitting at table 4. If he sees her, questions will be asked." "She snuck in, Reginald." My mother fired back, her voice laced with panic. My father finally turned his cold eyes toward me. "Zuri, I do not know how you bypassed the front doors, but your little stunt ends right now. There is a service exit right behind you. It leads straight to the loading dock. You are going to turn around, walk down those stairs, and leave this property immediately. If you do not, I will personally call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." I stood my ground, looking squarely at the man who had abandoned me. "You cannot arrest a guest who is causing no disturbance," I stated calmly. "I am simply standing here." Before my father could explode, the heavy velvet curtain was violently yanked back completely. Standing there, bathed in the light of the banquet hall, was Darius. Chantel was right behind him, gripping his arm. Darius had clearly spent the elevator ride up desperately trying to rebuild his shattered ego. He must have convinced himself that the security incident in the lobby was just a bizarre misunderstanding, a fluke of mistaken identity by a confused employee. Now, standing in front of his audience of wealthy peers, his arrogant composure was fully restored. He saw an opportunity to play the hero, and he was not going to pass it up. "Mom, Dad." "It is fine," Darius announced, his voice booming much louder than necessary. He purposefully projected his words so that the nearest tables of guests would stop talking and turn to look at us. Reginald frowned, trying to quiet him down. "Darius, keep your voice down. We are handling this." "No, let it be known." Darius continued, stepping fully into the room and gesturing grandly toward me. Several guests were now openly staring, their conversations halting as the family drama unfolded. "Let everyone see the prodigal daughter returning. Look at her mom. Look at how desperate she is. She probably has not eaten a decent meal in weeks. She heard about my success. heard about the wealth management firm, and came crawling back hoping for a handout. Darius smiled broadly, playing to the crowd. He placed a hand over his heart, looking like a martyr. But I am not a cruel man. I am a man of God, a man of charity. It is my parents' anniversary, a night of abundance and blessings. I will not turn my own flesh and blood away to starve in the streets. Let my poor sister stay. I am charitable enough to feed her. She can sit at the overflow table near the kitchen doors. Give her a plate of food so she can finally see what real success looks like. Murmurs of approval rippled through the nearby guests. I heard whispers praising Darius for his immense grace and Christian charity. Chantel dabbed at her dry eyes with a napkin, acting deeply moved by her husband's incredible generosity. Vivian and Reginald looked relieved that Darius had spun the situation into a PR victory for their golden child. "Thank you, Darius," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the self-congratulatory chatter. "Your generosity is truly overwhelming. I would love to stay." I did not walk to the overflow table by the kitchen. Instead, I walked directly toward the front of the room past the stunned faces of my parents and took a seat at the only empty chair at the main head table. The sheer audacity of my action left Darius temporarily mute. I smoothed my napkin over my lap and offered a polite smile to the city councilman seated across from me. Darius' face flashed with hot anger, but he could not cause a scene now. He had just publicly declared his charity. He gritted his teeth, grabbed Chantel by the hand, and marched over to the head table, taking his seat at the center. Vivian and Reginald quickly followed, plastering on fake smiles for the guests, while shooting daggers at me across the floral arrangements. The tension at the table was so thick you could cut it with a steak knife. Darius puffed out his chest, leaning over to the councilman to loudly discuss his supposedly brilliant investment strategies, deliberately trying to ignore my presence. He bragged about his tailored suit, his luxury cars, and the massive bill he was footing for tonight's event. He wanted everyone to know that he was the undisputed king of this castle. I sat quietly, taking a slow sip of ice water. I watched the doors at the far end of the hall. I knew exactly what was scheduled to happen next. Right on cue, the heavy mahogany doors swung open. The general manager of the restaurant stepped into the room. His face was visibly pale, and he was sweating lightly across his forehead. He looked extremely uncomfortable, clutching a black leather folio tightly to his chest. In his other hand, he held a wireless credit card reader. He did not walk toward the serving stations. He walked directly toward the head table, his eyes locked nervously on Darius. The trap had officially sprung. The general manager, a meticulously groomed man named Mr. Sterling, stopped right next to Darius. He cleared his throat nervously, leaning down to whisper, so as not to disturb the surrounding VIPs. "Excuse me, sir," Mr. Sterling murmured, his voice tight with professional apology. "There seems to be a slight issue with the payment method on file for tonight's event." Darius laughed loudly, waving his hand dismissively. He wanted everyone at the table to hear him. A slight issue. What did my bank flag it for being too large of a transaction? I told them I was making a $30,000 purchase today. Just run it again. He reached into his designer jacket and pulled out a heavy platinum credit card, tossing it onto the silver tray Mr. Sterling was holding. "Run it in front of me. I do not have time for incompetence." Mr. Sterling swallowed hard. He inserted the platinum card into the wireless terminal. The machine beeped a sharp, unpleasant sound that cut through the soft jazz music. The screen flashed a bright, undeniable red warning. "I am terribly sorry," Mr. Sterling said, his voice dropping even lower. "The card has been declined, sir. Insufficient funds." The words "insufficient funds" hung in the air like a foul odor. The city councilman seated across from us paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. Vivian and Reginald froze, their practiced social smiles instantly slipping from their faces. In our circles, public financial embarrassment was the ultimate sin. "What did you just say to me?" Darius snarled, his voice suddenly losing all its polished charm. The veins in his neck began to bulge against his tight collar. He snatched the machine from the manager's hand, staring at the red screen, as if it had personally insulted him. "You are calling me broke in front of my guests. Do you know who I am? I manage millions of dollars for the most elite families in Atlanta. Your cheap little machine is broken." He ripped the platinum card out and shoved his hand frantically back into his expensive leather wallet, pulling out a solid gold card. "Use this one. And when it goes through, I expect a massive discount on the final bill for this profound embarrassment." Mr. Sterling's hands shook slightly as he took the gold card and ran it through the terminal. The machine processed for 3 agonizing seconds before emitting that exact same sharp beep. Declined. Darius' face went from a healthy, glowing brown to an ashen, sickly gray. Impossible, he hissed, tiny drops of spittle flying from his lips. He was completely losing control of the narrative. He frantically dug through his wallet, pulling out a third card, a corporate expense card tied to his supposed wealth management firm, and shoved it into the machine himself. He jabbed his thumb onto the keypad, aggressively hitting the enter button. Beep. Declined. The polite murmurs of the banquet hall began to shift into an uncomfortable buzz. The jazz quartet was still playing, but the guests at the surrounding tables had stopped pretending to ignore the commotion. They were openly staring now, their eyes wide with judgment. Whispers spread like wildfire through the room. The wealthy elite of the city were watching their supposed golden boy completely melt down over a restaurant bill. Reginald leaned over, his voice a harsh, panicked whisper meant only for my brother. "Darius, what is going on here? Fix this immediately. You are making a horrific scene in front of the deputy mayor and his wife." "I am trying." Darius snapped back, the sweat now visibly rolling down his temples and staining the collar of his custom shirt. He looked like a cornered animal desperately looking for an exit. He turned his fury back onto the manager. "Listen to me, you incompetent fool. Call your bank right now. Call your IT department. I have the money. I am a highly successful wealth manager. This is a pathetic glitch in your outdated system." Chantel, seeing her perfect social standing evaporating before her eyes, quickly jumped up from her chair. She forced a high-pitched artificial laugh that sounded more like a panicked screech. "Oh, please, everyone, it is just a technical error," she announced loudly to the staring crowd, waving her manicured hands in a desperate attempt at damage control. "You know how these luxury hotels are. They spend all their money on beautiful chandeliers and buy cheap, faulty machines for the staff to use. It is a banking glitch. We will have it sorted out in a second. Just enjoy your expensive champagne." No one laughed with her. The councilman's wife leaned over and whispered something behind her hand to her husband, her eyes locked on Chantel's fake designer bag. The judgment in the room was palpable and suffocating. Mr. Sterling stood his ground, though he looked terrified of my brother's unpredictable rage. "Ma, I assure you our financial systems are fully operational," he said politely but firmly to Chantel. "I have tried 3 different accounts. Every single one has been flatly declined by the issuing banks. We require immediate payment for the banquet hall, or I will have to ask hotel security to halt the food service and begin clearing the tables." Darius looked like he was about to physically assault the manager. His breathing was heavy, his eyes wild and unhinged. He had no more credit cards to swipe. He had no hidden piles of cash. The grand illusion he had spent years building was breaking apart piece by piece, and he was completely powerless to stop it. He looked at his mother, at Vivian, with a silent, desperate plea begging her to write a check, but she quickly looked away, too humiliated by his public failure to even acknowledge him. This was the precise moment. I had sat in the shadows for years. I had watched him squirm. I had watched him sweat. Now it was time to end the charade. I stood up slowly from my chair at the end of the table. The movement drew the eyes of everyone in the immediate vicinity. I did not rush. I smoothed the front of my understated silk gown, picked up my clutch, and walked confidently around the table until I was standing directly next to my panicking, sweating brother. Darius glared at me, his eyes filled with absolute venomous hatred. "What do you want, Zuri?" He spat, his voice shaking with anger. "Are you enjoying this? Are you here to gloat while this idiot manager ruins my entire night?" I did not even look at him. I turned my attention entirely to Mr. Sterling, who looked incredibly relieved to see me standing there, taking control of the volatile situation. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a solid metal matte black credit card. It caught the warm light of the chandeliers, heavy, cold, and undeniable. Mr. Sterling. I said, my voice calm, authoritative, and projecting clearly enough for the surrounding tables to hear every single word. It seems my brother has encountered some unexpected financial turbulence this evening. We certainly cannot let my parents' ruby anniversary be ruined by something as trivial as an unpaid catering bill. I held the black card out toward the manager. I will cover my brother tab in full. Go ahead and run it, and please ensure you apply my owner discount to the final amount. Darius let out a harsh, mocking laugh, though it sounded incredibly weak and breathless. Your discount? What in the world are you talking about? You do not even have a real job. You think waving a piece of plastic around makes you somebody important. That machine is going to decline you too, and then we will both look like absolute fools in front of the entire city. Mr. Sterling completely ignored Darius' frantic insults. He took the heavy black metal card from my fingers with profound reverence. He did not swipe it. He did not insert it into the machine. He did not even need to run a transaction. He simply held the card against his chest, bowed his head deeply, and replied with absolute clarity. Right away, CEO Zuri. Thank you for your immense generosity. The owner discount will be applied immediately, and the food service will continue without any further interruption. The words echoed around the massive head table. CEO Zuri. Owner discount. Darius' jaw practically unhinged. Chantel let out a strangled, high-pitched gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth in sheer horror. Vivian and Reginald stared at me as if I had just sprouted a second head. The city councilman actually dropped his heavy silver fork entirely. It clattered loudly against his fine porcelain plate, ringing out like a bell in the sudden quiet of the room. What did you just call her? Darius demanded, his voice cracking into an undignified, panicked squeak. He grabbed Mr. Sterling by the sleeve of his uniform jacket. What did you just call her? She is not a CEO. She is a broke college dropout. She is a thief. You are lying. Who paid you to say that? Sir, please unhand me right now, Mr. Sterling said coldly, easily pulling his arm away from Darius' weakened, trembling grip. Miss Zuri is the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Equity. Her private investment firm successfully completed the absolute acquisition of the Grand Monarch Hotel Group last week. She owns this entire building. She owns the luxury restaurant you are currently sitting in, and she just paid the $30,000 bill that you clearly could not afford. The silence that fell over the banquet hall was deafening. It was as if someone had sucked all the oxygen straight out of the room. The jazz quartet had awkwardly stopped playing their instruments mid-song. Every single eye in the room was locked onto me. I looked down at my brother. The arrogant man who had thrown a crumpled $100 bill at my feet just an hour ago was now staring up at me with the horrifying realization that he was sitting inside my house eating my food and relying entirely on my charity to save him from total public ruin. I smiled down at him. It was a cold, razor-sharp smile that offered absolutely no mercy. Enjoy the meal, Darius, I whispered softly, making sure only he could hear the lethal finality in my voice. Consider it a gift. But the show was not over. As Darius sat there paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his humiliation, a loud, synchronized click echoed across the massive room. All evening, the giant digital screens mounted on the walls of the banquet hall had been displaying a slideshow of beautiful curated family photos. Pictures of Reginald and Vivian smiling, pictures of Darius graduating with honors, pictures of Chantel at their luxury wedding in the Hamptons. Images of a perfect wealthy family that had completely erased my existence from their history. Suddenly the screens flickered brightly. The fake family photos vanished entirely. A collective gasp rose from the hundreds of guests as the massive displays refreshed simultaneously. In place of the family history, a crisp professional corporate slide appeared. It was the official press release from the Financial Times. The massive headline read, Apex Equity acquires the Grand Monarch Hotel Group in landmark multi-million-dollar deal. And right in the center of every single screen in the room, towering 10 feet tall in brilliant high definition, was a stunning professional portrait of me. I was wearing a sharp, tailored suit, sitting at the head of a mahogany boardroom table, projecting absolute, untouchable power. Underneath the photo in bold gold lettering, it read the undeniable truth. Zuri, Chief Executive Officer and sole owner. Darius stared up at the giant screens, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his chest heaving as if he could not draw enough oxygen into his failing lungs. He was trapped in a nightmare he could not wake up from. He had spent his entire life building an empire of lies, and I had just bought the ground it stood on. The trap was fully closed, but the real devastation had only just begun. I watched the exact moment my mother brain rebooted. Vivian stared at the screen, her jaw slack, and then slowly turned her head to look at me. The sheer, unadulterated shock that had initially frozen her features began to melt away. In its place, a terrifyingly familiar, calculating gleam sparked in her eyes. I could practically see the gears grinding in her head as she processed the impossible reality. Her discarded, unworthy daughter was not a vagrant. Her daughter was a multi-millionaire. Her daughter owned the very ground they were standing on. With a speed that would have been impressive if it were not so deeply repulsive, Vivian executed a flawless 180-degree emotional pivot. The venomous woman who had dragged me behind a velvet curtain to whisper threats just 20 minutes ago completely vanished. In her place stood the radiant, fiercely proud matriarch. "Oh my goodness," Vivian cried out, her voice suddenly dripping with a sickeningly sweet theatrical joy. She pressed both of her hands to her chest, her eyes wide as she looked around at the staring guests. She let out a loud, breathless laugh that echoed through the silent room. "Zuri, my brilliant, beautiful girl, you planned this entire thing as a surprise for our anniversary. Oh, you sneaky, wonderful child." She stepped forward, her arms outstretched, intending to pull me into a tight, loving embrace in front of the city elite. She wanted to instantly brand my success as her own. She wanted everyone in that room to believe my wealth was a direct result of her excellent parenting. I took one single deliberate step backward. Her empty arms closed around nothing but air. Vivian faltered for a fraction of a second, a flash of pure irritation crossing her eyes, but she quickly recovered, plastering that fake radiant smile right back onto her face. She clasped her hands together, turning to the crowd. "Did you all see this? My daughter, the CEO. We always knew she was destined for absolute greatness. We pushed her hard, yes, but look at the diamond we created." Reginald, catching on to his wife's desperate strategy, quickly stood up and cleared his throat. He smoothed the lapels of his custom tuxedo, instantly adopting the posture of a proud, authoritative patriarch. "We are incredibly blessed," Reginald announced, his deep voice projecting across the tables. "We always believed in keeping our family business private, allowing our children to build their empires in silence. I am profoundly proud of you, Zuri. You have secured our family legacy." I stared at them, my face a mask of cold stone. The absolute audacity of their delusion was breathtaking. They were actually trying to claim ownership of the empire I built from the ashes of their rejection. Vivian turned back to me, her voice lowering into a conspiratorial, businesslike tone, though still loud enough for the immediate tables to hear. "Now, darling, this is a massive operation. A hotel group of this size is a tremendous responsibility for a young woman to handle all on her own. We need to restructure immediately to protect the family assets." I tilted my head, studying her like an interesting biological specimen. "Restructure," I repeated flatly. "Yes, exactly," Vivian said, nodding enthusiastically, as if we were entirely on the same page. "You have done the hard work of acquiring the property, sweetheart, and we are so proud. But running it requires a certain kind of aggressive leadership. Darius has his MBA. He is a wealth manager. He knows how to handle large-scale operations and high-net-worth clients. It is only logical that you step down to a quiet board position and make your brother the active CEO." He is the man of the family, Zuri. He has the degree and the pedigree for this kind of public role. It will look much better to the investors to have him at the helm. Reginald nodded in firm agreement. Your mother is absolutely right, Zuri. We will draw up the executive transfer papers first thing Monday morning. Darius will take over the day-to-day operations, and we can move the family wealth management offices into the executive suite here. It is the perfect synergy. Darius, who had been sitting frozen in his chair, suddenly looked up. A tiny flicker of hope ignited in his bloodshot eyes. He straightened his posture, desperately grasping at the lifeline his parents were throwing him. Yes, he croaked, his voice still shaky but gaining strength. Yes, I can step in. I can fix this. I can manage the portfolio for you, Zuri. You do not know how to handle this level of capital. I can protect you. For 5 long seconds, I simply looked at the three of them. I looked at the sheer, suffocating entitlement radiating from their pores. And then I laughed. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a cold, sharp, echoing laugh that sliced through the tension in the banquet hall like a guillotine. The sound of my laughter made Vivian flinch, and Reginald's face darkened with sudden anger. You want me to make him CEO? I asked, my voice ringing with absolute mockery. I pointed directly at Darius, who shrank back into his chair. You want me to hand over a billion-dollar hospitality empire to a man whose platinum credit card was just declined for a $30,000 catering bill? A man who cannot even afford the suit on his back without opening a new line of credit? Are you completely out of your minds? Vivian's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. Zuri, do not speak to your brother that way. He is family. Family. I repeated the word, tasting like ash in my mouth. Let us talk about family. Let us talk about the black tax. I turned away from my parents and looked directly out into the crowd of wealthy, successful guests. Many of them shifted uncomfortably in their seats. They knew exactly what I was talking about. It was the unspoken rule in our community, the crushing, suffocating expectation that the moment you achieve any level of success, your bank account immediately becomes a public utility for everyone who shares your bloodline. You look at me, I said, my voice steady and echoing across the crystal glasses and floral arrangements. And you do not see a daughter. You do not see a sister. You see a walking ATM. You see a bailout fund. You believe that simply because we share genetics, you are automatically entitled to the fruits of my labor. You spent my entire life telling me I was worthless. You threw me out into the street 7 years ago with absolutely nothing, labeling me a failure because I refused to play your shallow social games. Reginald slammed his hand down on the table. That is enough, Zuri. You will not disrespect us in public. I turned on him, my eyes blazing with a fire that made him physically recoil. You demand respect when you offer none. I shot back, my voice rising with undeniable authority. You sat there in the lobby while your golden boy threw a $100 bill at my feet and told me to go eat garbage. You pulled me behind a curtain and threatened to have me arrested for breathing the same air as your precious guests. And now the second you realize I own the building, you want to hand my company over to the exact same man who just tried to throw me out. You do not love me. You love my assets. Vivian dropped the sweet mother act entirely. Her face contorted into a mask of pure ugly desperation. We gave you life, she shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly. We put a roof over your head. You owe us. You owe this family. Darius needs this position. His clients are watching. You will not humiliate us like this. I do not owe you a single dime, I stated with absolute icy finality. My wealth is mine. My company is mine. I built it while you were busy parading him around like a trophy. I am not paying your black tax. I am not funding your luxury cars. I am not subsidizing your country club memberships. And I am certainly not giving a job to a man who is fundamentally incapable of managing his own checking account. The answer is no. Not today. Not ever. The absolute rejection hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I had stripped away their power, their pride, and their illusions of control, all in one swift motion. Reginald sank back into his chair, looking suddenly very old and very tired. Darius buried his face in his hands, completely defeated. But I had forgotten about Chantel. While Darius crumbled and my parents scrambled, Chantel had been standing off to the side, vibrating with pure, unadulterated fury. She had spent her entire life defining herself by her proximity to wealth and status. She had built her entire identity on being the superior wealthy sister-in-law, looking down on the pathetic, broke outcast. And in the span of 10 minutes, I had entirely destroyed her reality. I had exposed her husband as a fraud and myself as a titan. Her fragile ego simply could not process the humiliation. If she could not have the wealth she was going to ensure I could not enjoy it either. She needed to drag me back down into the mud. She needed the room to look at me with the same disgust they had just directed at her husband. Chantel let out a guttural sound of pure rage. She kicked off her designer heels, the sound of the stiletto snapping echoing loudly. She stormed past the head table, her eyes wild and manic, marching directly toward the small raised stage where the jazz quartet stood frozen in shock. Chantel no Darius yelled, finally lifting his head, recognizing the unhinged look in his wife's eyes. But it was too late. Chantel shoved past the saxophone player and violently ripped the microphone from its heavy metal stand. The speakers let out a sharp, ear-piercing squeal of feedback that made several guests cover their ears. Chantel stood center stage, gripping the microphone with white knuckles, her chest heaving as she glared down at me with absolute murderous intent. Do not let her fancy tailored suit and this ridiculous corporate title trick you into giving her 1 ounce of your respect. She is not a brilliant private equity CEO. She is a fraud. She is a degenerate. She is a convicted criminal. The banquet hall erupted into shocked gasps. The jazz musicians nervously backed away from the stage, lowering their instruments as the elegant anniversary dinner officially spiraled into a public spectacle. Chantel paced back and forth on the elevated platform, the broken heel of her designer shoe completely forgotten in her manic desperation to destroy me. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my face, her eyes wild with the thrill of exposing my deepest trauma. 7 years ago, Chantel continued, her voice dripping with venom. This so-called titan of industry was a disgraced, pathetic college student. She was the acting treasurer for the Black Student Union at her university. She was trusted to manage the funds that were supposed to help underprivileged minority students pay for their tuition and their textbooks. And what did she do with that massive responsibility? She embezzled $50,000. She stole $50,000 of scholarship money from her own peers to fund a degenerate lifestyle. She was investigated, she was publicly expelled from her university in absolute disgrace, and she was seconds away from being thrown into a federal prison cell. The murmurs in the room grew into a loud, uncontrollable buzz. Wealthy socialites covered their mouths in horror, looking at me with pure revulsion. In our specific social circle, respectability politics were everything. A theft of that magnitude, especially stealing scholarship money from other young Black students, was considered the ultimate unforgivable social taboo. Chantel fed off their shock, her confidence swelling as she saw the tide of public opinion momentarily turning against me. She had found my weak spot, or at least she thought she had. Reginald saw the opportunity and immediately seized it. He could not stand the thought of his previously discarded daughter holding absolute power over his current life. He needed to reclaim his position as the righteous patriarch of the family. He stepped out from behind the head table, his chest puffed out instantly, adopting a look of profound tragic sorrow. "It is the painful, shameful truth," my father announced, his deep, commanding voice carrying easily across the silent room. "We have spent the last 7 years hiding this devastating family secret to protect our reputation and our legacy in Atlanta. We are a family of standing in this community. We hold positions on the board of the Urban League. We are respected members of our church. We gave Zuri every possible advantage in life to succeed. We gave her a beautiful home, a stellar education, and our unconditional love. But she chose the dark path of deceit. When the university discovered the missing $50,000, the authorities came directly to our front door." Reginald paused, perfectly timing his dramatic delivery. He looked out at the city councilman and the deputy mayor, ensuring they were hanging on his every word. "We paid the massive restitution to the university quietly. We drained our own emergency savings accounts to cover her criminal tracks and keep her out of a jail cell. And how did she repay us? She showed no remorse. She refused to apologize for the pain she caused this family. We were forced to make the hardest decision any loving parent could ever make. We had to kick her out of our home. We officially disowned her to protect our family name and to protect our son Darius from being dragged down by her criminal behavior. We did the right thing. We cut out the toxic element to save the rest of the family. The room was entirely on their side now. I could feel the heavy, judgmental stares burning into my skin from every single angle. The people who had just been in awe of my corporate acquisition were now looking at me like I was a piece of trash that had somehow blown in through the pristine front doors. Darius, sitting at the head table, slowly lifted his face from his hands. A sick, triumphant smile began to spread across his lips. He believed Chantel and Reginald had just saved him. He genuinely believed they had successfully assassinated my character, rendering my wealth and my power completely invalid in the eyes of their high society friends. I stood alone in the center of the room. I did not flinch. I did not yell in my own defense. I did not shed a single tear. I just watched them perform their desperate, pathetic play. They thought they had cornered me. They thought bringing up the darkest, most traumatic moment of my life would break me down and force me to retreat into the shadows, just like I did 7 years ago when I was young, terrified, and desperate for their validation. But they were dealing with a ghost they created. And ghosts do not feel fear. I turned my back on my father and slowly walked toward the corner of the banquet hall, where the audio-visual control booth was set up. The head technician, a young man in a black polo shirt, looked utterly terrified as I approached. He had his hands hovering over the massive mixing board, unsure if he should cut Chantel's microphone or just let the family drama play out. "Step aside, please," I said to the technician, my voice perfectly calm but leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. He swallowed hard and took a quick step back. I am not supposed to let anyone touch the soundboard during a private event," he stammered nervously, wiping his sweating palms on his uniform pants. "I own the soundboard," I replied simply, reaching past him to examine the complex array of buttons and sliders. "I own the speakers. I own the stage you are looking at. I sign your paychecks. Step aside." He nodded rapidly and backed completely out of the booth, wanting no part of the impending explosion. I pulled my sleek black smartphone from my designer clutch. I reached down and picked up a heavy auxiliary audio cable connected directly to the main surround sound system of the banquet hall. I plugged the cable firmly into the port on my phone. Chantel, still standing awkwardly on the stage, noticed what I was doing. Her triumphant smile faltered for a second. "What are you doing?" she yelled into her microphone, her voice bouncing off the walls. "Are you trying to cut off my sound? You cannot silence the truth, Zuri. Everyone in this room now knows exactly what kind of monster you really are. You cannot hide behind your money tonight." I did not bother looking at her. I picked up a spare wireless microphone resting on the control desk and flicked the power switch on. "You are absolutely right, Chantel," I said softly. My voice boomed through the massive overhead speakers, instantly drowning her out with crystal-clear precision. "The truth absolutely cannot be silenced, and we are going to lay the entire truth bare tonight in front of all these wonderful witnesses." I tapped the screen of my phone, opening my highly encrypted audio files. I scrolled past business recordings, board meeting minutes, and legal briefings, until I reached a secure folder locked behind a biometric scan. I pressed my thumb to the screen. The folder opened immediately, revealing a single, isolated audio file. I looked up from my phone and locked eyes with my brother Darius across the expansive room. His smug smile had completely vanished. He was staring at the auxiliary cord connecting my phone to the sound system, and a look of deep, primal dread began to wash over his features. He did not know exactly what I was about to play, but his guilty conscience was already suffocating him. He began to hyperventilate, his chest rising and falling rapidly under his custom suit jacket. 7 years ago, I spoke into the microphone, my voice echoing with a chilling clinical detachment. 7 years ago, $50,000 disappeared from the Black Student Union Fund. That part of your story is entirely correct, Father. The university threatened immediate police action. The precious family name was put on the line, and I was violently thrown out of my childhood home, left to sleep in my car during the freezing Atlanta winter, with absolutely nothing but the clothes on my back and a ruined academic record. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the weight of my past suffering hang in the absolute silence of the room. I wanted them to feel the gravity of what they had done to me. But there is a very crucial detail that my loving father and my righteous sister-in-law conveniently left out of their little speech. Just now, I continued my eyes scanning the faces of the shocked guests. A vital detail about who actually took the money and who was violently forced to take the fall to protect the family golden child. Reginald's face turned an ashen shade of gray. He took a stumbling step backward, grabbing the edge of the head table to keep his balance. Darius shot up from his chair, knocking his crystal water glass over in the process. It shattered loudly on the hardwood floor, but nobody even blinked. "Stop!" Darius yelled, his voice cracking in pure, unadulterated panic. "Whatever she is doing, stop her right now. Turn off the speakers. Somebody cut the power to the room." I held my finger hovering directly over the play button on my glowing screen. I saved this audio file on multiple secure cloud servers. I have backed it up every single month for the last 7 years to ensure it would never be lost. I have carried this horrific recording with me for exactly 2,555 days. I listened to it when I was starving in my car. I listened to it when I was exhausted working 3 minimum wage jobs just to survive. I listened to it every single time I felt like giving up to remind myself exactly why I needed to become utterly untouchable. "Zuri, do not do this!" Vivian shrieked from the head table, her hands flying to her head, as she finally realized the catastrophic danger they were all in. "You are going to ruin everything." I pressed play. The crisp, high-fidelity audio filled the banquet hall instantly. There was a brief hiss of static followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy, pathetic sobbing. It was not the dignified cry of a man facing his mistakes. It was the frantic, hyperventilating sniveling of a coward who had just been caught. Every guest in the room froze in their seats as my brother's voice echoed from the massive overhead speakers. "I am sorry," the recorded. Darius wailed, his voice thick with panic and tears. "I did not mean to lose it all, Mom. I thought the tip was a sure thing. I thought I could double the student union money at the casino tables and put the principal back before the audit on Monday. But the dealer kept hitting blackjack. It is all gone, Mom. The whole 50,000. They are going to expel me, and they are going to send me to federal prison." The guests in the banquet hall gasped in unison. The elite socialites and respected politicians stared at the speakers in absolute disbelief. Then my mother's voice came through the audio system. It was not the voice of a mother shocked by her son's criminal behavior. It was cold, calculating, and ruthlessly efficient. "Stop your crying right now," the recorded Vivian snapped. "You are a man, so you need to act like it. We are not letting you go to prison over some petty scholarship fund. You are going to graduate, and you are going to take over your father's firm. But the audit is on Monday," the recorded. Darius sobbed. "They are going to trace the withdrawal directly to my laptop." "No, they are not." Vivian's voice replied, sharp as a razor. "Listen to me very carefully. We are going to print out the fabricated bank statements tonight. We will plant the bank statements in Zuri's room. We will put them right at the bottom of her desk drawer where the university investigators will easily find them." "But what about Zuri?" Darius whimpered on the recording. "She will get expelled. She will get arrested. I do not care about Zuri." Vivian's voice hissed through the speakers, carrying a cruelty that made the current guests physically recoil in their chairs. "Your future is too bright to ruin Darius. Zuri is not going anywhere in life anyway. She is a useless distraction. We are sacrificing the weak branch to save the tree." Now wipe your face and help me print these documents before your father gets home." The audio file ended with a sharp digital click. The silence that followed was heavy, toxic, and suffocating. It was the kind of absolute silence that precedes a massive structural collapse. I stood calmly at the audio-visual booth and slipped my phone back into my designer clutch. The banquet hall erupted. It was not a gentle murmur of upper-class gossip. It was an explosion of absolute outrage. The wealthy socialites, the politicians, and the longtime family friends turned to look at my parents with expressions of profound, unadulterated disgust. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect, righteous family was entirely annihilated in less than 60 seconds. The deputy mayor wife stood up from her chair, her face flushed with anger, and threw her cloth napkin directly onto her untouched plate. "This is absolutely repulsive," she declared, her voice carrying clearly across the surrounding tables. "You framed your own daughter. You destroyed an innocent young woman's life to protect a degenerate thief." Others began to chime in immediately. The city councilman shook his head, looking at Reginald with pure contempt. "You sat on the board of the Urban League with me, Reginald. You preached to the community about integrity and family values. And all this time you were hiding a criminal and throwing your own flesh and blood to the wolves to rot." Reginald stumbled backward, his face drained of all color. He raised his hands defensively, desperately trying to calm the angry crowd, but he had no words. His pristine reputation was completely exposed and shattered. Vivian, however, went into a state of blind, frantic denial. She simply could not accept that her entire social standing was evaporating before her very eyes. She let out a panicked shriek and began sprinting toward the audio-visual booth. She was entirely convinced that if she could just destroy the sound equipment, she could somehow erase the memories of what everyone had just heard. "Turn it off!" Vivian screamed, her arms flailing wildly as she ran clumsily in her high heels. "It is a fake. It is a fabricated recording. She paid someone to make that up to ruin us." She never made it to the booth. In her blind panic, she did not see the heavy brass base of the towering floral centerpiece standing near the edge of the dance floor. Her designer heel caught hard against the solid metal footing. Vivian pitched forward violently. She threw her hands out to catch herself, but she crashed heavily onto the polished hardwood floor, taking the massive floral arrangement down with her. Crystal vases shattered loudly. Dozens of deep red roses and gallons of freezing ice water rained down over her expensive ruby anniversary gown. It was a pathetic and humiliating spectacle. The grand matriarch of the family, the woman who demanded absolute perfection and elegance at all times, was now sprawled on the floor in a puddle of water and broken glass, surrounded by the furious glares of the people she so desperately wanted to impress. Reginald did not even rush to help his wife up. He simply stood frozen at the head table, paralyzed by the monumental weight of his own public shame. Chantel had backed far away from the microphone on the stage. Her vicious smear campaign had completely backfired in the worst possible way. She realized that by bringing up the past, she had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy them all. She dropped the microphone, the loud thud echoing through the room, and retreated rapidly into the shadows near the kitchen doors. She was desperately trying to distance herself from the radioactive fallout of her husband-revealed crimes. But Darius did not run. As the stark reality of his exposure set in, something inside my brother completely snapped. The panic and terror that had gripped him earlier completely vanished, replaced quickly by a feral, unhinged rage. He had spent his entire life being told he was superior to everyone else. He had been heavily conditioned to believe that the rules did not apply to him, and that no matter what he did, he would always be the golden child. His fragile ego simply could not process the concept of public defeat. He stepped over the broken water glass at his feet and marched aggressively into the center of the room. He completely ignored our mother crying on the wet floor. He ignored the disgusted stares of his former friends and investors. He locked his bloodshot eyes entirely on me. "So what?" Darius bellowed, his voice raw and echoing with pure madness. "So what if I took the money? So what if you got kicked out of school? Look at you standing here today. You survived, did you not? He beat his fist hard against his chest, his tailored suit jacket pulling tight across his broad shoulders. I am the sun. I am the heir. I was the one with the actual potential to carry this family name into the stratosphere. A measly $50,000 was just the cost of doing business. It was a minor setback on my inevitable way to greatness. You think playing a tape from 7 years ago changes anything about who we are today? He pointed a violently shaking finger at me, a wild, arrogant grin spreading across his sweating face. You think owning one hotel makes you better than me? You think you have won because you embarrassed us at a dinner party. You are absolutely nothing compared to the financial empire I have built. The guests watched in horrified silence as Darius launched his ultimate defense. He was doubling down on his delusion with everything he had left. I am a top-tier wealth manager, Darius screamed to the room, desperately trying to reclaim his lost authority. I manage a $5 million private portfolio. I control the financial destinies of the most powerful people in Atlanta. I manage our parents' entire retirement fund. I have access to capital that you cannot even begin to comprehend, Zuri. I drive a luxury Porsche. I live in an exclusive gated community. My clients trust me with their lives. I am the financial backbone of this entire family. He took another aggressive step toward me, his chest heaving as he tried to intimidate me physically. You caught me in a mistake I made when I was just a kid. But I grew up, and I became a titan. You are just a lucky amateur who probably leveraged yourself up to your eyeballs in dirty debt just to buy this building. Tomorrow morning, I will make one phone call to my investors, and I will buy this hotel right out from under you. I will buy your entire private equity firm, and I will liquidate it just for fun. I watched him rant and rave in the center of the room, letting him dig his grave as deep as he possibly could. He was frantically clinging to his fake wealth like a life raft in a violent hurricane. He truly believed his fabricated status as a financial genius would somehow shield him from the consequences of his past actions. I slowly walked away from the audio-visual booth and moved toward the center of the room to meet him. I did not raise my voice. I did not match his feral, unhinged energy. I simply reached into my sleek designer briefcase that was resting on a nearby empty table. Are you quite finished, Darius? I asked calmly. I pulled out a thick stack of heavily bound, meticulously audited financial documents. The paper was crisp, heavy, and undeniable. I held the stack in my hands, feeling the weight of his absolute destruction resting comfortably in my palms. You speak a lot about your wealthy clients, Darius, I said, my voice carrying cleanly across the silent, breathless room. You boldly boast about your massive portfolio. You brag endlessly about managing our parents' retirement fund. So tell me, as a top-tier wealth manager, perhaps you can explain a very interesting discrepancy I found during my firm's recent debt acquisition. Darius glared at me, his chest still heaving, but a new flicker of deep uncertainty flashed in his wide eyes. What are you talking about? He spat defensively. I held the thick stack of financial documents up for him to see clearly. I am talking about your $5 million portfolio, Darius. Or rather, the complete and total lack of it. Darius let out a harsh, breathless laugh that sounded more like a bark of panic. You are completely delusional, he yelled, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. That recording you just played was a pathetic fabrication. It is a deep fake. You paid someone to splice together old home videos to make me sound guilty. You are just trying to distract everyone from the fact that you are a total fraud. He puffed his chest out desperately, trying to physically intimidate me from across the room. He adjusted his silk tie with shaking hands, trying to project an air of superiority that had already evaporated. I am a top-tier wealth manager, he repeated, his voice cracking slightly under the strain of his own lies. I hold a $5 million portfolio. I am managing our parents' $2 million retirement fund as we speak. That money is sitting in secure, high-yield offshore accounts that a street rat like you could never even dream of accessing. He took a step forward, emboldened by his own desperate delusions. You are nothing but a lucky amateur, Zuri. You probably fronted the money for this hotel using dirty loans from shady private lenders. You are over-leveraged, and you are going to crash and burn within 6 months. When you do, I am going to buy out your little hotel group for pennies on the dollar. I will liquidate your firm and leave you exactly where you belong, sleeping in your car. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match his unhinged screaming. I simply walked past him, my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor, and approached the head table. Reginald and Vivian had both abandoned their seats. The fine silk tablecloth was littered with overturned crystal glasses and the remnants of their expensive anniversary dinner. I pulled out the massive carved mahogany chair at the very center of the table, the seat of the patriarch, and I calmly sat down. I placed my designer briefcase on the floor and laid the thick stack of audited financial documents completely flat on the table in front of me. The crisp white paper contrasted sharply against the dark red rose petals scattered across the linen. I took my time. I let the silence in the banquet hall stretch out, forcing Darius to stand awkwardly in the middle of the room while I meticulously arranged the files. You talk an awful lot about your wealth, Darius, I said, my voice projecting clearly without any need to shout. You build your entire identity around this image of a financial genius. You drive a Porsche. You buy your wife designer bags. You rent this lavish banquet hall to show the city elite just how successful you are. But the thing about private equity is that we do not care about the clothes you wear or the car you drive. We only care about the math. I opened the first folder. It was stamped with the bright red seal of a major federal accounting firm. And the math, Darius. The brutal, undeniable math tells a very different story about your so-called empire. Darius swallowed hard, his chest heaving rapidly. What garbage did you print out, Zuri? He demanded, trying to sound dismissive but failing completely. You cannot just forge financial documents and expect anyone here to believe you. My clients know my worth. Our parents know my worth. I looked past him to where our mother was still sitting on the wet floor, completely paralyzed by shock, and our father was leaning heavily against a nearby pillar, looking physically ill. They were not defending him anymore. The entire room of wealthy socialites and politicians had fallen dead silent, hanging on every single word I was about to say. When my firm acquired this hotel group, we did not just buy the physical real estate, I explained calmly, tracing my finger down a column of printed numbers. We bought the debt. We bought the holding companies. We absorbed multiple distressed financial portfolios to restructure the assets. That is what a real private equity firm does. We clean up the messes left behind by incompetent men who think they can play with other people's money. I flipped to the second page of the audit. And during our standard due diligence, my forensic accountants flagged a very peculiar series of transactions. They found a massive web of over-leveraged loans, maxed-out credit lines, and high-interest shadow mortgages. It was a textbook case of financial bleeding. Someone was desperately moving money around from one account to another just to pay the minimum interest on their luxury lifestyle. That has nothing to do with me, Darius interrupted loudly, though he took a small step backward. You are wasting everyone's time. I ignored him entirely. I picked up a glossy photograph from the stack and tossed it onto the center of the table. It was a picture of the exact Porsche Darius had parked at the valet stand downstairs. Your luxury car is leased, I stated flatly, and the lease is currently 4 months past due. The dealership filed a repossession order last Tuesday. Chantel, who had been hiding near the kitchen doors, let out a sharp gasp. She stared at Darius, her eyes wide with sudden terror. Darius, what is she talking about? Chantel demanded, her voice trembling. Tell her she is lying. We own that car. You told me we bought it in cash. Darius did not look at his wife. He kept his eyes locked on the table, his breathing growing shallow and rapid. Shut up, Chantel, he hissed through his teeth. She is just trying to confuse you. I picked up another document. This one was a thick legal contract bordered in heavy black ink. I held it up for the room to see. It is not just the car, Chantel, I said, my voice carrying a tone of absolute clinical detachment. Your beautiful house in the gated community, the one with the heated pool and the manicured lawn. It is not a purchased asset. It is a short-term luxury rental. And according to the eviction notice filed in Fulton County Court yesterday morning, you have exactly 72 hours to vacate the premises before the sheriff arrives to physically remove your belongings. The banquet hall erupted into shocked whispers once again. The wealthy guests who had just spent the entire evening listening to Darius brag about his real estate investments were now staring at him with open disgust. The illusion was completely shattering. He was not a peer, he was an imposter. Chantel stumbled forward, her broken heel making her gait uneven and frantic. She grabbed Darius by the arm, digging her manicured nails into his expensive suit jacket. "Darius, look at me," she shrieked, her carefully maintained socialite persona completely disintegrating. "Is it true? Are we being evicted? Where is all the money you made from your wealth management firm? Where are your clients?" He ripped his arm away from her, his face contorted in a mask of pure panic and rage. "Get off me," he yelled. "She is lying. It is all a setup." But he had no defense. He had no proof. He was standing in the middle of a room full of people who actually possessed the wealth he was desperately pretending to have, and they could all smell the desperation rolling off him in waves. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the final stack of papers resting in front of me. The sound was sharp and rhythmic, like a ticking clock counting down the final seconds of his fabricated life. "You see, Darius?" I continued, leaning slightly forward in the heavy mahogany chair. "The car and the house are just the superficial lies. Those are just the shiny objects you used to convince Chantel and our parents that you were a success. But those lies are completely insignificant compared to the real fraud you have been running." I placed both of my hands flat on the table, locking my eyes completely onto his sweating, terrified face. The room was so quiet, you could hear the ice shifting in the abandoned water glasses. "You claim you are a top-tier wealth manager," I said, dropping my voice to a lethal, commanding register. "You claim you hold a $5 million portfolio. But my forensic accountants dug deep into the public registry. You do not hold a single valid financial license in the state of Georgia. You do not have a registered firm. You do not have a single legitimate client." Darius opened his mouth to speak, to scream another denial, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He was suffocating under the crushing weight of his own exposed reality. I picked up the final document. It was a thick, bound dossier containing the absolute destruction of his entire existence. I held it gently between my fingers, feeling the power of absolute truth. "So I have a very simple question for you, brother." I said, my words echoing clearly into the absolute silence of the room. "If you are such a brilliant, successful wealth manager, Darius, why did my private equity firm just purchase the distressed debt of a bankrupt shell company registered under your name?" Darius staggered backward, as if he had been physically struck. The color completely drained from his face, leaving behind a sickly pale gray. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He looked wildly around the room, searching for an escape route that simply did not exist. The guests were staring at him with a mixture of morbid curiosity and profound disgust. I did not wait for his fabricated excuse. I reached into my briefcase again and pulled out several thick manila envelopes. I unfastened the clasps and began calmly sliding copies of the executive summary across the polished hardwood of the dance floor toward the nearest tables. The city councilman picked up the packet immediately. The deputy mayor wife snatched one up, adjusting her reading glasses. Within seconds, the most influential people in our community were actively reviewing the undeniable proof of my brother's financial crimes. Let me break down the complex financial jargon into brutal, undeniable truth for everyone in this room. I announced, my voice carrying the crisp authority of a woman who destroyed corporations before lunch. Darius does not run a wealth management firm. He operates a hollow shell company registered to a virtual mailbox in a strip mall on the outskirts of town. He possesses absolutely no financial licenses. He has no legitimate institutional clients. He does not trade equities. He does not manage bonds. He does not possess a magical offshore high-yield account. The sound of thick paper pages turning echoed loudly in the quiet banquet hall. Several guests gasped as they read the highlighted figures. What he actually runs is a classic affinity fraud. I continued pacing slowly behind the heavy mahogany chair. It is a textbook Ponzi scheme. He used his last name, his expensive tailored suits, and his membership at your exclusive country clubs to gain your absolute trust. He convinced people in his own community to hand over their hard-earned capital under the guise of exclusive private investments. But he never invested a single dime of that money. He simply used the fresh cash from new victims to pay off the older victims who were demanding their returns. That is a lie, Darius finally managed to scream, his voice cracking into a pathetic pitch. Do not look at those papers. She fabricated all of it. I am a licensed professional. The city councilman looked up from the document in his hands. His expression was one of pure, lethal fury. You took $50,000 from my brother-in-law last month. Darius, the councilman growled, his voice vibrating with anger. You told him you were putting it into a commercial real estate trust. This audit says you wired that exact amount to a luxury car dealership the very next morning to stop the repossession of your vehicle. Darius flinched violently. He raised his hands in a weak defensive gesture. I can explain that he stammered, sweat pouring down his forehead. It was a temporary liquidity bridge. The real estate trust is finalizing next quarter. There is no real estate trust, I stated coldly, cutting off his pathetic lie. There is no liquidity bridge. There is only a man desperately leveraging fake assets to maintain an illusion he can no longer afford. Every single thing he owns is a mirage built on stolen money. I turned my attention to Chantel. She was standing near the kitchen doors, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. Her perfectly styled hair was slightly disheveled, and her expensive makeup could not hide the sheer panic tightening her features. That beautiful designer wardrobe you love to flaunt, Chantel, I said, pointing a steady finger toward her. Those limited edition Hermes bags you carry like trophies. The first-class tickets to Miami. The private dinners at five-star restaurants. Every single luxury you have enjoyed for the last 5 years was purchased with stolen money. Your husband has been robbing his own community blind just to keep you dressed in silk and diamonds. He has been leveraging credit lines under fake corporate entities just to buy your affection and secure his fake status. Chantel let out a strangled cry. She lunged forward on her one good heel and snatched a copy of the audit summary directly from the hands of a terrified socialite sitting at a nearby table. She did not ask for permission. She frantically flipped through the pages, her manicured nails tearing the crisp paper in her haste. She stared at the highlighted bank statements, the eviction notices, the defaulted loan agreements, and the endless lists of angry creditors demanding repayment. Her eyes widened to an almost comical degree. Her chest began to heave with rapid, hyperventilating breaths. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her like a concrete wall. She was not the wealthy, envied wife of a financial genius. She was legally married to a broke, desperate criminal who was moments away from federal indictment. She was about to lose her luxury rental home. She was about to lose her leased car. She was about to lose her entire social standing. She would be an absolute pariah in Atlanta high society. No. Chantel whispered, the document trembling violently in her hands. No, no, no. This cannot be happening. Darius, you told me we were rich. You told me we were clearing millions this year. You told me we were buying a vacation home in Aspen. Darius looked at his wife with a mixture of fear and sudden resentment. Shut up, Chantel, he hissed, stepping toward her. Just keep your mouth shut and let me handle this. I can fix it. I just need a little more time. I have a massive deal closing next week that will cover all the margins. Fix it! Chantel screamed, her voice shattering the last remaining shreds of decorum in the banquet hall. She threw the crumpled audit summary directly into his face. How are you going to fix it? You are completely bankrupt. You are a fraud. I married a pathetic broke loser. I gave up my youth for you. I defended you. I let you buy me things with stolen money. They are going to come after me. The feds are going to freeze my accounts. They are going to take my bags. She began to sob hysterically, clutching her designer dress, as if the federal agents were already in the room ready to strip it off her back. Her breakdown was ugly and entirely self-centered. She did not care about the people Darius had robbed. She did not care about the community he had betrayed. She only cared about her impending poverty and her ruined aesthetic. I watched the two of them turn on each other like rabid animals trapped in a cage. The loyalty they had pretended to share was completely conditional. It was entirely dependent on the steady flow of stolen cash. The moment the money evaporated, their marriage dissolved into toxic mutual hatred. The guests watched the horrific spectacle in stunned silence. The absolute destruction of the golden child was complete. He had nothing left. No money, no status, no respect, and not even the support of his fiercely materialistic wife. He was completely isolated in a room full of people who now saw him exactly for what he truly was, a cowardly, desperate thief. But the drama was not over. My father, Reginald, finally pushed himself away from the pillar he had been leaning against. He looked 10 years older than he had when the evening began. His custom tuxedo suddenly looked entirely too large for his deflating frame. He stumbled forward past the shattered glass and the spilled champagne. He walked past my mother, who was still sitting in a damp puddle of misery on the floor. Reginald approached the center of the room. He looked at Darius, his golden son, with a mixture of profound betrayal and desperate denial. He could not accept that his entire legacy was built on a criminal lie. He needed a lifeline. He needed just one tiny shred of dignity to cling to in front of his wealthy peers. He looked at the audit documents scattered across the tables. He looked at the angry faces of the city councilmen and the investors. And then he looked at me. "Zuri," my father said, his voice trembling with a hollow, desperate hope. His hands were shaking as he clasped them together in front of his chest. "This is a lot of information. This is a massive misunderstanding regarding his business accounts. Darius clearly made some poor investments with his corporate capital. He made some grave errors in judgment regarding his personal lifestyle expenses." Reginald took a deep, shaky breath, trying to summon the authoritative patriarchal tone he had used to control me my entire life. But his voice lacked all conviction. "But the family money is separate," Reginald declared loudly, directing his words to the surrounding guests as much as to me. He was desperately trying to reassure the crowd that he was not a fool. "The retirement fund is completely secure. We transferred $2 million from the sale of our commercial properties directly into an irrevocable family trust last year. Darius is the trustee. He manages it, but he cannot touch the principal for his personal debts. That money is protected by federal banking laws." My father puffed out his chest, a pathetic imitation of his former pride. He looked at the city councilman, offering a weak, reassuring smile. "At least our retirement fund is safe in his trust. We still have our foundation. We can weather this storm." I stood completely still. I looked at the man who had thrown me out into the freezing cold streets 7 years ago to protect the criminal standing next to him. I looked at his desperate, clinging hope. I did not feel anger anymore. I did not feel the burning need for revenge that had fueled my early years of corporate climbing. As I stared into my father's terrified, pleading eyes, the only emotion that washed over me was a profound, suffocating pity. He had absolutely no idea. I slowly reached back into my designer briefcase. I pulled out one final, heavily redacted folder. It was the only document I had not yet distributed to the crowd. It was the document that would sever my ties to this family forever. "Dad," I whispered, my voice dropping into a tone of quiet, absolute tragedy. "Oh, Dad, you really should have checked your bank statements." Reginald stared at the heavily redacted folder resting in my hand. His eyes darted nervously between me and the polished mahogany table. He did not reach out to take the file. It was as if he instinctively knew that touching the physical paper would make the nightmare completely real. He kept his hands tightly clasped against his chest, his breathing shallow and rapid. I did not give him the luxury of remaining willfully ignorant. I opened the folder myself, pulling out a thick legal document and slid it directly across the table until it touched his fingertips. This is a certified copy of a second mortgage agreement, I stated clearly, ensuring my voice carried to the wealthy guests standing in frozen shock at the surrounding tables. It was filed exactly 8 months ago against your primary residence. The house you and Mom have lived in for 30 years. The massive brick colonial estate you proudly planned to pass down as part of your grand family legacy. Reginald swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing in his throat. We never took out a second mortgage, he whispered, his voice trembling so violently he sounded like a frightened child. That is impossible. The house was paid off a decade ago. We own it free and clear. We have the original deed in our home safe. You did own it free and clear, I corrected him gently, feeling absolutely no remorse as I shattered his entire reality. Until your trusted financial genius of a son decided he needed a massive injection of liquid capital to keep his failing Ponzi scheme afloat. Look at the signature line on the last page, Dad. Look very closely at the bottom right corner. Reginald leaned forward slowly. He pulled his gold wire reading glasses from his breast pocket with shaking hands and slid them onto his face. He stared down at the blue ink printed on the copied document. A low, wounded sound escaped his throat. It was a sound of absolute heartbreaking realization. That is not my signature, Reginald gasped, stumbling a full step away from the table. That is not your mother's signature either. Someone forged our names. This is a fraudulent document. Darius forged your names, I said, pointing directly at the sweating, trembling man standing a few feet away. He used his trusted position as your wealth manager and his status as the primary trustee of your estate to bypass the standard banking verification protocols. He leveraged the entire equity of your home and pulled out $1.5 million in pure cash. Darius violently shook his head, his face a mask of pure terror. No, he cried out, raising his hands defensively as if trying to ward off a physical blow. I was going to put it back. You have to believe me, it was a guaranteed return. I just needed to ride the market wave for a few more weeks. I was going to pay off the mortgage and keep the profit. Ride the market wave. I repeated, my tone laced with heavy, lethal disgust. You took the equity from our parents' home, and then you took the entire $2 million from their secure retirement trust. You liquidated all of their safe index funds. You drained every single penny they saved for 30 years. And where exactly did you put $3.5 million of stolen family money, Darius? He did not answer. He just stared down at his expensive Italian leather shoes, his chest heaving with panicked breaths. You put it into Apex Crypto Exchange, I announced to the breathless room. A completely unregulated offshore digital currency platform that was publicly flagged by the Securities and Exchange Commission 6 months ago for highly suspicious activity. The exact same exchange that permanently halted all user withdrawals last Tuesday before declaring Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The money is gone, Darius. It is not sitting in a temporary dip waiting to recover. It has been seized by federal liquidators. Every single penny of our parents' retirement is gone. Vivian let out a sharp, horrific gasp from the floor. She scrambled to her feet, her ruined ruby anniversary gown clinging wetly to her legs, completely ignoring the broken glass crunching loudly under her shoes. She dug frantically into her crystal clutch and pulled out her smartphone. No, Vivian muttered rapidly to herself, her hands shaking so violently she nearly dropped the phone. She snatched it back with a desperate grip. He would never do that to us. He is a good son. He is a brilliant boy. He would never steal from his own mother. You are lying, Zuri. You manipulated those documents. Open your banking app, Mom, I instructed quietly. Log in right now. Look at the trust account. Look at your primary checking account. Tell me exactly what you see. Vivian typed her password. Her manicured thumbs were slipping on the smooth glass screen due to the cold sweat coating her skin. The banquet hall was completely silent. The wealthy guests, who had once envied her social standing, were now watching her with a mixture of profound horror and morbid fascination. The loading icon spun on her screen for 3 agonizing seconds. Then the financial dashboard appeared. Vivian stared at the glowing screen. Her eyes widened until they were almost completely white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. She just stared at the numbers displayed on the screen. Or rather, the complete and total lack of them. 0. Vivian whispered, her voice cracking into a dry, pathetic rasp. It says 0. Where is the retirement fund, Darius? Where is the $2 million? She frantically tapped the screen again, navigating quickly to their primary checking account. The account they used to pay their daily living expenses, their expensive country club dues, and their property taxes. She let out another choked, agonizing gasp. Overdrawn, she read aloud, her voice rising in pitch until it was almost a scream. Overdrawn by $40,000. How is that possible? We had hundreds of thousands of dollars in liquid cash just sitting there. We are rich. We are a wealthy, influential family. You were a wealthy family, I corrected her with absolute surgical precision. Until your golden boy bled you completely dry to fund his fake lifestyle. And because your primary accounts are entirely drained, the automatic payments for that forged second mortgage have been bouncing for the last 90 days. I reached into the folder one last time and pulled out a single piece of paper. It was a formal legal notice printed on thick, distinctive yellow paper. I handed it directly to my father. This was served to the estate by a county sheriff deputy while you were busy getting dressed for this lavish party, I said. It is a formal notice of foreclosure. The bank has officially initiated proceedings to seize the house. You have exactly 30 days to clear the premises. You do not have a retirement fund. You do not have a savings account. And by the end of this month, you will not have a home. A piercing, blood-curdling scream ripped through the banquet hall. It came from Vivian. She drew her arm back and threw her smartphone directly at Darius with all her strength. The heavy device struck him squarely in the chest and clattered loudly to the floor, shattering the screen. "You stole from us!" Vivian shrieked, launching herself forward toward her favorite child. "You stole my house! You stole my entire future! I covered up a crime for you 7 years ago. I threw my own innocent daughter out into the street for you. And you robbed me blind." Reginald grabbed his wife by the waist, pulling her back before she could physically attack Darius. But Reginald had no strength left in his body. He collapsed heavily into a nearby chair, dragging Vivian down with him. He buried his face in his large hands and began to weep openly in front of the entire room. The proud, arrogant patriarch, the man who cared only about his public image and his social dominance, was completely broken. His legacy was ashes. His wealth was an illusion. His golden son was a parasitic monster he had personally created. The facade of the perfect bourgeois family was entirely annihilated. The city elite were literally backing away, putting physical distance between themselves and my disgraced parents. The toxic rot that had festered inside our home for decades was now fully exposed to the harsh light, and the stench was unbearable. Darius stood completely frozen in the center of the room. He looked at his weeping father and his screaming, hysterical mother. He had completely destroyed them. Then he slowly turned his desperate, pleading eyes toward his wife. He was looking for any anchor in the violent storm. He reached his trembling hand out toward her. "Chantel, baby," Darius begged, his voice pathetic and weak. "Please look at me. We can get through this. I can call some private investors. I can start over. I will make it all back. We are a team." The look on Chantel's face shifted from pure, terrified panic to absolute feral rage. The realization that she was permanently legally tied to this massive sinking ship completely broke her fragile sanity. She did not just yell. She turned on him like a rabid, starving dog. "A team," Chantel screamed, her voice tearing her throat and echoing violently off the walls. "You lied to me every single day. You told me we were Atlanta royalty. You made me walk into this room tonight and act like I was better than everyone else. You made me attack your sister on a microphone. And all this time, you were a broke, pathetic criminal dragging me down into the absolute gutter with you." She closed the distance between them in 2 massive, aggressive strides. She raised her heavy luxury handbag and swung it with all her might. The solid metal clasp connected loudly with the side of Darius' face. He cried out in sudden pain, stumbling backward and raising his arms to cover his face. "I am filing for divorce tomorrow morning," Chantel shrieked, hitting him again and again with the heavy bag. "I am not going to federal prison for you. I am not living in a homeless shelter for you. I am taking whatever is left in our name, and I am leaving you with absolutely nothing. You are garbage, Darius. You are absolute pathetic garbage." Darius fell to his knees on the hardwood floor, desperately trying to shield his head from her frantic, violent blows. He was openly weeping now, begging her to stop looking toward our parents for help, but nobody moved to intervene. The security guards standing by the grand doors looked at me for instructions. I simply raised my hand and shook my head slightly. Let them tear each other apart. It was exactly what they deserved. Let them tear each other apart. It was exactly what they deserved. Chantel stopped hitting him only because she was completely out of breath. Her chest heaved violently under her ruined designer gown. She looked down at the pathetic, sobbing man curled up on the wet hardwood floor, and her expression twisted into a mask of absolute revulsion. She realized that hitting him was not going to save her. Being anywhere near him was a liability she could no longer afford. She reached for her left hand. Her fingers clamped down on the massive 5-carat diamond engagement ring Darius had given her. The ring she had shoved into the faces of every single woman in our social circle for years. The ring he had explicitly bragged about buying in cash. She violently yanked the ring off her finger, scraping her own skin in the process. "Take it back!" Chantel screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Take your fake stolen garbage back, Darius. I am not going down with you. I am not letting the federal agents freeze my accounts. I am not moving back into the hood because you decided to play pretend with other people's money. I will testify against you. I will tell the authorities every single thing you did if it keeps me out of a prison cell." She threw the heavy diamond ring directly at his face. It bounced off his forehead with a dull thud and rolled away, disappearing under a nearby table covered in spilled champagne and shattered crystal. Darius scrambled onto his hands and knees. He was not crawling toward his furious wife. He was frantically crawling across the wet floor, searching for the ring. He was a man completely stripped of his humanity, reduced to a desperate animal digging through the trash for a single scrap of his fabricated wealth. Chantel did not look back. She turned on her bare heel, completely ignoring her broken shoe lying on the floor, and marched aggressively toward the grand exit of the banquet hall. She shoved past the wealthy guests, keeping her head held high in a pathetic final attempt to preserve her dignity. But nobody was looking at her with envy anymore. They were looking at her like she was radioactive. The heavy brass doors slammed shut behind her, echoing like a gunshot through the silent room. The sound of the doors closing seemed to break the spell that had frozen the rest of the guests. The mass exodus began immediately. The elite of Atlanta did not want to be anywhere near this catastrophic implosion. They knew federal indictments were coming, and in our world, proximity to a financial scandal was an absolute death sentence for any political or social career. The deputy mayor turned to his wife, offered her his arm, and began walking toward the exit. He stopped briefly near my father, who was still slumped in his chair. "Reginald," the deputy mayor said, his voice cold and devoid of any previous warmth, "do not ever contact my office again. Consider my endorsement for your Urban League initiative permanently revoked." My father did not respond. He simply stared blankly ahead, watching his entire carefully curated universe disintegrate into absolute nothingness. As the room rapidly emptied out, leaving only the wreckage of the Ruby anniversary party behind, my mother finally seemed to realize the inescapable reality of her situation. Her golden son was ruined. Her husband was a social pariah. Her home was in foreclosure. Her bank accounts were overdrawn. The lavish lifestyle she had built her entire identity around had evaporated into thin air. Vivian dragged herself up from the floor. Her expensive red gown was stained dark with water and wine. Her meticulously styled hair hung in wet clumps around her face. Her makeup was running in dark streaks down her cheeks. The proud, arrogant matriarch who had terrorized me for 2.5 decades was entirely gone. She stumbled toward me. She did not walk with her usual elegant, terrifying grace. She practically crawled. When she reached the space directly in front of the heavy mahogany chair where I was sitting, Vivian did the one thing I never in my entire life thought I would witness. She dropped heavily onto her knees. She reached out with both hands and grabbed the fine silk fabric of my understated dress. Her grip was desperate and tight, her knuckles turning white. Zuri, Vivian wept, her voice a raw, pathetic wail. Zuri, please, you have to save us. I did not pull my dress away. I simply sat there and looked down at the top of her ruined head. You have the money, my mother begged, looking up at me with bloodshot, pleading eyes. You just said you own this entire hotel group. You have millions of dollars, Zuri. You can fix all of this with one single phone call. Please, baby, please help your family. I stared at the woman kneeling in the spilled wine. I looked at the tears streaming down her face, and I felt absolutely nothing. The well of empathy I used to hold for this woman had run completely dry years ago. You can pay off the mortgage, Vivian cried, shaking my dress to try and force a reaction out of me. You can give us the money to replace the retirement fund. You can hire the best corporate lawyers in the state to keep your brother out of federal prison. We are your blood, Zuri. I am your mother. I carried you. You cannot just sit there and watch us lose everything. She let out a loud, racking sob, burying her face against my knees. I am sorry, she wailed into the fabric of my dress. I am so sorry for everything I ever did to you. I was wrong. We were all wrong. You are the successful one. You are the brilliant one. We will make it right, Zuri. We will tell everyone the truth. We will welcome you back into the house. Just write the check. Please just write the check and save us. Her apology was entirely hollow. It was not born out of genuine remorse for the horrific trauma she had inflicted upon me. It was born entirely out of financial terror. She was only apologizing because her bank account read zero. If Darius had actually possessed the $5 million portfolio he bragged about, she would have happily spent the rest of the evening ignoring my existence. I looked down at her and my mind instantly flashed back through 25 years of relentless emotional abuse. I remembered being 7 years old, standing in the kitchen with a perfect spelling test, desperate for just a fraction of a smile from her. She had swatted the paper out of my hand because Darius had a minor headache and needed absolute quiet. I remembered being 16, working a part-time job to buy my own winter coat because she refused to spend money on clothes for the dark cloud of the family. I remembered the sheer icy cruelty in her eyes 7 years ago when she stood in the foyer of our colonial home, holding the door open to the freezing winter night, and told me I was a worthless criminal who deserved to starve in the streets. For 25 years, this woman had systematically stripped away my self-worth. She had conditioned me to believe that my only value was measured by how much space I could yield to her precious son. The contrast between the cold, unfeeling monster of my childhood and the pathetic, groveling beggar kneeling at my feet right now was incredibly stark. It was almost poetic. Let go of my dress, Vivian, I said. My voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was just a quiet, absolute command that carried the weight of a seasoned executive. Vivian flinched at the sound of my cold tone. She slowly opened her hands, releasing the wrinkled silk fabric, but she remained on her knees. She looked up at me with a face completely devoid of pride, hoping against hope that my calm demeanor meant I was going to agree to her demands. She genuinely believed that deep down, I was still that desperate little girl who would gladly pay millions of dollars just to hear her say she loved me. I slowly reached over to the polished wooden table. I picked up my sleek designer clutch. The smooth leather felt cool and grounding against my palm. I snapped the gold clasp open. The sharp click echoed in the quiet space that was now completely abandoned by everyone except my ruined family and my loyal security team. You want me to save you? I asked quietly, looking directly into my mother's tear-filled eyes. You want me to give you exactly what I owe this family? Yes. Vivian sobbed eagerly, nodding her head so fast her wet hair whipped across her face. Yes, Zuri, please. I knew you would not abandon us. I reached my hand inside the dark interior of my clutch. My fingers brushed past my car keys and my encrypted smartphone until they found the exact object I was looking for. I closed my hand around it and slowly pulled it out. I pulled my hand out of the dark interior of my designer clutch. My mother held her breath, her tear-stained face tilted upward in an expression of desperate anticipation. She was fully expecting me to produce a sleek black checkbook. She was waiting for me to pull out a platinum credit card or a stack of bearer bonds that would instantly wipe away the monumental consequences of her golden sun crimes. Instead, I opened my fingers and let the object drop perfectly into her waiting, trembling palms. Vivian stared down at her hands. The absolute confusion on her face was palpable. Resting against her wet skin was not a check for $3.5 million. It was a single piece of paper. It was the crumpled, wrinkled $100 bill that Darius had thrown onto the marble floor of the lobby just a few hours earlier. The exact same bill he had used to humiliate me and tell me to go eat garbage while they celebrated their fake legacy. I kept it, I said quietly, looking down at the crumpled green paper in her hands. Vivian looked up at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Zuri, she stammered, her voice thick with confusion. What is this? This is $100. I do not understand. We need millions to save the house. We need to pay the bank. I stepped back, putting physical and emotional distance between us. Here, I said, my voice echoing with icy finality. Buy yourselves some fast food. The words hung in the quiet banquet hall, heavy and sharp. It took Vivian exactly 3 seconds to recognize the insult. She remembered the scene in the lobby. She remembered standing there in her expensive gown, watching her son throw that exact bill at my feet, while she smiled in quiet approval. The memory hit her like a physical blow to the chest. She looked down at the $100 bill and let out a soft, pathetic whimper. You are not going to help us, Vivian whispered, her voice breaking completely. After everything I just said, after I apologized, you are really going to let us lose the house. You are going to let them put your brother in prison. I am not letting anything happen to you, Mom, I replied, my tone completely devoid of sympathy. I am simply refusing to interfere with the natural consequences of your own horrific choices. You let him steal your future. You enabled his delusions because you preferred a son who lied to you over a daughter who told you the truth. Reginald let out a harsh, bitter sob from his chair, but he did not try to argue. He knew I was right. He knew they had built this trap with their own 2 hands. But we are your family, Vivian cried out, clutching the $100 bill to her chest, as if it were a physical shield. We share the same blood, Zuri. You cannot turn your back on your own blood. It is a sin against God. I let out a short, bitter laugh that held absolutely no humor. Blood. I repeated the word, tasting sour on my tongue. You love to talk about blood when it serves your agenda. You love to weaponize the concept of family when you are the ones who need a bailout. But where was that unbreakable bloodline 7 years ago? Where was your sacred family loyalty when you framed me for his felony? Where was my mother when I was sleeping in the back seat of a freezing car, terrified and completely alone? Vivian flinched, closing her eyes tightly against the reality of her past actions. Bloodline means absolutely nothing without loyalty, I stated, my voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. Genetics do not give you a free pass to abuse people. Sharing DNA does not entitle you to my bank account. You ceased being my family the moment you decided I was a disposable pawn in your game of social climbing. A real family protects its own. You threw me to the wolves, and now you are furious because I came back leading the pack. I looked past my weeping mother and locked eyes with Darius. He was still curled up on the floor, nursing the red mark on his face, where Chantel had struck him with her luxury handbag. He looked pathetic, The arrogant wealth manager had been completely stripped away, leaving only a terrified little boy who had finally run out of lies to tell. "I will not pay a single cent toward your fraudulent debts," I said, making sure every syllable was perfectly enunciated. "I will not save the colonial house. I will not replace the retirement fund that you blindly allowed him to gamble away on an offshore crypto exchange. You are going to face absolute total bankruptcy. You are going to learn what it feels like to start over from nothing, exactly like you forced me to do." Vivian collapsed entirely, her forehead resting against the wet hardwood floor. She wept with a loud, racking intensity that echoed through the massive, empty room. It was the sound of a woman mourning the death of her own ego. Reginald sat frozen, staring blankly at the overturned tables and the shattered crystal glasses, a king ruling over a kingdom of ashes and broken promises. I felt a profound sense of closure wash over me. For years I had carried the heavy, suffocating weight of their rejection. I had let their cruel words dictate my self-worth. But standing here looking at the reality of who they truly were, I realized they were never giants. They were just small, terrified people hiding behind expensive clothes and fabricated status. I did not need their approval anymore. I did not need their love. I was completely and utterly free. I turned away from my kneeling mother and picked up my briefcase. It was time to leave. But as I adjusted the strap of my bag, a sudden dramatic shift occurred in the atmosphere of the banquet hall. The soft ambient lighting of the room was abruptly pierced by bright flashes of color. Through the towering floor-to-ceiling stained glass windows that lined the far wall of the venue, rhythmic bursts of intense red and blue light began to strobe across the darkness of the Atlanta night. The flashing lights painted the walls of the banquet hall in frantic alternating colors, illuminating the horrified faces of my family members. Then the sound arrived. The distinct piercing wail of multiple police sirens echoed from the street below. The sirens were not passing by. They were growing rapidly louder, converging directly on the front entrance of the Grand Monarch Hotel. Darius' head snapped up from the floor. His bloodshot eyes widened in pure primal terror as the red and blue lights washed over his face. He scrambled backward, pushing himself away from the windows as if the lights themselves could burn him. "No," Darius gasped, his breath hitching in his throat. "No, no, no. They cannot be here for me. It is too soon. The audit just came out. The bank needs 30 days to file a formal complaint." Reginald stood up from his chair, his knees trembling so violently he had to grip the edge of the mahogany table to stay upright. "What is happening, Zuri?" my father demanded, his voice cracking with panic. "Did you call the local police to throw us out of the building? Is that what this is? Are you having us arrested for trespassing?" I shook my head slowly, maintaining my absolute calm amidst their escalating hysteria. "The local police do not send a convoy of vehicles with full lights and sirens for a simple trespassing charge, Dad," I replied softly. Heavy boots began to march down the long marble corridor outside the banquet hall. It was not the disciplined, measured steps of my private security team. It was the loud, aggressive sound of a tactical unit moving with absolute purpose. The heavy brass doors at the end of the hall rattled slightly as someone on the other side prepared to push them open. "You see, Darius," I said, turning my attention back to my brother, who was now hyperventilating on the floor. "You made a very critical miscalculation when you assumed you understood how my private equity firm operates. You thought we simply bought your distressed debt to humiliate you at a dinner party. You thought I was just going to hold the financial records over your head and watch you squirm." Darius stared at me, his chest heaving, his mind completely unable to process the impending reality of his total destruction. "I am a licensed financial professional," I stated clearly, raising my voice just enough to be heard over the deafening wail of the sirens outside. "When my forensic accountants uncover evidence of a massive multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme during a corporate acquisition, we do not just keep that information to ourselves. We have a legal and ethical obligation to report our findings." The heavy brass doors of the banquet hall burst open with a loud, violent crash that made Vivian scream. But I did not just report the corporate fraud. I continued, my voice cutting through the chaos like a sharpened blade. I also submitted the forged second mortgage documents. I submitted the complete audit trail showing exactly how you drained $2 million from an irrevocable retirement trust. I looked down at my brother delivering the absolute final blow. Wire fraud across state lines is a serious offense, Darius. But forging signatures to steal a lifetime of savings from senior citizens elevates this to a completely different level. I did not just buy your debt. Yesterday morning, I submitted the entire comprehensive audit of your wire fraud and your elder financial abuse directly to the regional director of the federal authorities. And they take those charges very, very seriously. Before Darius could even attempt to form another pathetic excuse, the heavy brass doors of the banquet hall were violently pushed wide open. A team of 6 federal agents stormed into the room. They moved with absolute military precision, wearing dark windbreakers with the letters FBI printed in bold yellow across their backs. The lead agent, a tall, stern man with a silver badge clipped to his belt, swept his sharp gaze across the ruined room and locked his eyes directly onto my brother. Darius Wilson, the lead agent, announced, his voice booming with undeniable legal authority that echoed off the high ceilings. We have a federal warrant for your arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud, securities fraud, and the financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. Darius let out a sound that was entirely less than human. It was a high-pitched squeal of pure primal panic. He scrambled backward on the wet hardwood floor, his expensive Italian leather shoes slipping uselessly on the spilled champagne and crushed rose petals. He crashed into the edge of the head table, knocking over the last remaining crystal vase. It shattered loudly, but the agents did not even blink. "Please wait," Darius begged, holding his trembling hands up in a desperate defensive gesture. "You do not understand the situation. I have the money. I can make full restitution by Monday morning. I am a respected wealth manager. I have powerful clients. This is just a simple civil dispute between siblings." The agents did not slow their approach. 2 of them flanked him instantly, grabbing his arms with practiced force and hauling him roughly to his feet. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the agent commanded, completely ignoring my brother and his frantic bargaining. "I am not a criminal," Darius screamed, his voice cracking as the agents forced his arms behind his back. "Look at me. I wear custom suits. I drive a Porsche. I am the son of Reginald Wilson. You cannot do this to me. Mom, tell them. Dad, do something. Call the mayor. Call your lawyer. Do not just let them take me like this." The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists echoed through the room. It was the loudest sound I had ever heard, the definitive sound of a fabricated empire crashing to the ground. My father Reginald did not move a single muscle. He remained slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the floor. The patriarch who had spent his entire life curating a flawless public image was now paralyzed by the absolute destruction of his legacy. He could not call the mayor. The politicians and elite socialites had already fled the building, treating the Wilson family name like a highly contagious disease. He had no lawyer who could fight a federal indictment with 0 funds in his bank account. He was completely powerless. My mother, Vivian, remained on her knees in the damp puddle of spilled wine. She watched in sheer horror as the federal agents began reading her golden child his Miranda rights. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent recited calmly over Darius' loud, pathetic sobbing. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Vivian looked down at her hands. Her fingers were still tightly clutching the crumpled $100 bill I had given her. It was the only liquid asset she had left in the entire world. The staggering realization of her total bankruptcy finally hit her with the force of a speeding train. Her massive colonial house was gone, her retirement was gone, her social standing was eradicated, her flawless son was a federal inmate. "Please take me with him." Vivian wept openly, her tears dropping onto the green paper in her hands. "I have nowhere else to go. We have nothing left. We are ruined. Darius did not look back at his sobbing mother as the agents marched him toward the exit. His head hung low, his shoulders slumped in absolute defeat. The tailored suit that he wore like a suit of armor was now wrinkled and stained with floor water. The city elite who were still lingering near the lobby downstairs would see him being paraded out in handcuffs. The humiliation would be complete, absolute, and thoroughly televised on the morning news. I stood in the center of the wreckage and watched them take him away. The flashing red and blue lights from the police cruisers outside continued to pulse through the stained glass windows, casting long, dancing shadows across the banquet hall. "We are clear here, Ma. I'm the head of my private security team," Andre said as he stepped quietly to my side. He kept his voice low and deeply respectful. "The local authorities have secured the perimeter, and the federal transport vehicle is already departing the premises. The catering staff is waiting for your signal to begin the cleanup process." "Thank you, Andre," I replied, my voice steady and calm. "Give the staff a massive bonus for dealing with this unprecedented disruption tonight, and tell them they can throw all of these ruby anniversary decorations directly into the dumpster. There is nothing left here to celebrate." "Understood completely." Andre nodded. "Shall I escort you to your vehicle?" "No," I said, taking a deep breath of the air inside the room. For the first time in my entire life, the air around my family did not feel suffocating. It felt incredibly light. "I think I will head upstairs for a while." I turned my back on Reginald and Vivian. I did not offer them a parting word of sympathy. I did not offer them a final lecture on morality. They were no longer my responsibility. They were simply two strangers sitting in the ruins of their own terrible choices. I walked out of the banquet hall, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor of the corridor. Andre walked a few paces behind me, ensuring my absolute safety and privacy. As the heavy brass doors closed behind me, cutting off the sounds of my mother wailing, I felt a physical weight lift from my shoulders. It was a burden I had carried for 25 years, the heavy, crushing expectation to earn their love, the terrifying fear of their rejection, the deeply ingrained belief that I was fundamentally flawed simply because I did not fit into their shallow, toxic mold. It was all completely gone. I stepped into the private executive elevator. I swiped my owner card and pressed the button for the rooftop terrace. The elevator shot upward, smooth and silent, carrying me far away from the wreckage of my past. When the doors opened, I stepped out into the cool, crisp night air. The rooftop terrace of the Grand Monarch Hotel was a sprawling oasis of lush greenery, modern fire pits and infinity glass railings that offered an unobstructed view of the entire city. I walked over to the edge of the terrace and rested my hands on the cool, smooth glass. Below me, the city of Atlanta glittered like a sea of diamonds scattered across black velvet. The headlights of thousands of cars moved like glowing rivers through the concrete canyons. The distant sound of traffic and city life drifted up to the rooftop, a constant humming reminder that the world was massive, alive, and entirely full of endless possibilities. I looked down at the streets where I had once slept in my freezing car. I remembered the hunger that gnawed at my stomach. I remembered the sheer, terrifying loneliness of being discarded by the people who were supposed to protect me unconditionally. I remembered staring up at these very skyscrapers, promising myself that one day I would not just survive the storm they put me through. I would become the storm itself. Tonight I had fulfilled that promise. But as I stood there looking over my empire, I realized that true freedom was not found in the act of destroying my brother. It was not found in proving my parents wrong. The revenge was satisfying, yes, but it was incredibly fleeting. True freedom was found in the absolute severing of the toxic roots that had kept me tethered to the ground for so long. In our community, we are constantly told that family is absolutely everything. We are told that blood is thicker than water. We are manipulated into believing that we must endure endless emotional abuse, financial extortion, and profound disrespect simply to honor a biological connection. We call it loyalty. We call it the black tax. We call it paying our dues. But it is not loyalty. It is a hostage situation disguised as love. I had spent my youth trying to water a dead tree, hoping it would miraculously produce fruit. I poured my energy, my sanity, and my self-worth into the dry soil of my parents' approval, only to be handed the blame for their favorite son failures. I was the scapegoat, the sacrificial lamb slaughtered on the altar of their public image. But a tree that is rotten at the core cannot be saved. No matter how much you water it, the rot will eventually spread to the branches. It will poison the leaves. It will block out the light. If you want to survive, if you want to actually thrive and build a life of authentic power, you cannot simply prune the bad branches. You have to take an axe to the trunk. You have to rip the roots completely out of the soil and walk away. I took a deep breath of the cool night air, letting it fill my lungs completely. I was Zuri. I was 32 years old. I was the sole owner of a private equity firm that commanded millions of dollars. I owned this hotel. I owned my future. I had built a new family made of loyal friends, trusted colleagues and mentors who celebrated my brilliance instead of burying it in the shadows. I had survived the absolute worst they could do to me, and I had emerged entirely untouchable. I looked up at the vast, endless expanse of the night sky above the glittering city. There were no limits anymore. There was no one left to tell me I was unworthy. There was no one left to demand my resources to fund their illusions. I was completely unburdened, standing at the absolute pinnacle of the kingdom I had built with my own two hands. Some trees need to be uprooted so you can finally see the sun. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace and your future? Tell me your story in the comments below, and remember, your success is the loudest revenge. The most powerful lesson from this story is that a bloodline does not automatically equal loyalty. Society often conditions us to tolerate emotional abuse and financial exploitation simply because it comes from family. But a shared last name is not a free pass to disrespect your boundaries or drain your resources. True family is built on mutual respect, protection, and unconditional love, not transactional demands. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is uproot yourself from toxic soil to build an empire of your own. Your worth is never defined by those who failed to see your true value. Have you ever had to cut ties with a toxic family member to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe for more empowering journeys.